Butyrka Prison, Moscow. One of the most notorious and chilling prisons in Russia is Butyrka, a grim facility in central Moscow that has housed some of the country's most infamous figures. Originally a pretrial detention center, Butyrka has earned a dark reputation for its inhumane conditions and harsh treatment of inmates. Among its famous prisoners are Adolf Hitler's nephew and the renowned writer Alexander Solzhenitsyn, who spent time there. Butyrka is infamous for its poor conditions, with limited access to medical care, insufficient lighting, and very little exercise. In 2009, Sergei Magnitsky, a lawyer who was imprisoned under questionable charges, tragically died in Butyrka after being denied medical treatment for serious health conditions. His suffering and eventual death highlighted the grave human rights abuses occurring within the facility. Butyrka also housed Sergei Golovkin, a sadistic and infamous serial killer known as the Boa. Between 1986 and 1992, Golovkin lured young boys into his lair, torturing, raping, and murdering them. Over 6 years, he killed 11 boys, often strangling them before committing grotesque acts. His gruesome crimes earned him a reputation as one of Russia's most horrifying criminals. Inmates report that Butyrka's primary goal is to break individuals mentally and physically. The conditions are designed to wear them down, stripping away any sense of dignity or hope. For those like Golovkin, the prison became a reflection of the brutality they lived out on the outside. Butyrka is synonymous with the darkest corners of the Russian prison system, where humanity seems to vanish behind the walls. It remains a place where the most dangerous criminals endure and often become victims of their environment, just as they made victims of others. HM Prison Barwon, Australia. Located outside Melbourne, Australia, HM Prison Barwon is infamous for its high security and harsh living conditions. With separate units designated for different categories of inmates, the prison houses both high-risk offenders and those requiring protection from the general population. It has a reputation for being a place where control is the top priority, often at the expense of prisoner welfare. The daily life of inmates at Barwon is tightly controlled. They wake early, make their beds, and are counted by guards, marking the start of another rigid day. Meals are minimal and often consist of low-grade food, such as rice, porridge, and soup, leaving many inmates to rely on food sent by their families or prepare their own with limited supplies. The strict regime and lack of basic comforts contribute to a culture of tension and distrust within the facility. Barwon is also notorious for several violent incidents. In 2010, convicted gangland murderer Carl Williams was murdered by a fellow inmate, Matthew Johnson, while in Barwon. In 2015, an unprovoked attack by 2 prisoners on officers in the Grevelaya unit left several prison staff injured. The prison's overcrowding, lack of waste management, and frequent inmate assaults on officers contribute to an environment that feels less like a place of rehabilitation and more like a holding pen for society's most dangerous individuals. Among the notorious inmates of Barwon is John Miles Sharp, who committed a horrific triple murder. Sharp brutally killed his pregnant wife, Anna Marie Kemp, and their young daughter Gracie with a spear gun. He then went to great lengths to conceal his crimes, dismembering his wife's body and disposing of the remains in a landfill. Despite his grisly actions, Sharp later appeared on television feigning concern for his family, manipulating the public's perception before he finally confessed to the murders. His horrifying crimes earned him 2 consecutive life sentences with no parole for 33 years. At Barwon, Sharp's crimes are a chilling reminder of the twisted minds that the prison system contains, where the most vile criminals are kept under strict control. ADX Florence, Colorado, USA. ADX Florence, often called the Alcatraz of the Rockies, is one of the most notorious and secure prisons in the United States. Situated in the isolated foothills of Colorado's Rocky Mountains, this supermax facility was designed to house the most dangerous and high-profile criminals who pose a serious threat to public safety and cannot be kept in regular prisons. Since its opening in 1994, ADX Florence has been home to some of the country's most infamous inmates, including terrorists, gang leaders, and those with a history of violent behavior that led to death or injury of other inmates and prison staff. These individuals are often deemed too dangerous for any other facility, making ADX Florence the last stop for many notorious criminals. The security at ADX Florence is unmatched, with a range of measures both inside and outside the prison's perimeter. The facility is surrounded by razor wire fences, and guard towers are positioned strategically to monitor all activity. Inside, inmates are segregated into 6 different units based on their crime history and behavior. These units are equipped with advanced security technologies, including cameras, motion sensors, and pressure pads that ensure no part of the facility is left unchecked. Inmates are confined to small, isolated cells that measure only 7 feet by 12 feet, and they spend 20 to 24 hours a day inside them, with little to no social interaction. The prison is also designed to ensure that even the smallest movement is tracked, and escape is practically impossible, making it one of the most secure places in the world. Life at ADX Florence is defined by extreme isolation and sensory deprivation. Even the most basic privileges, such as recreation or social visits, are heavily restricted. Inmates are allowed brief periods outside, but even during this time, they are completely alone in secure outdoor pens, known as empty swimming pools, which are walled off to ensure they cannot interact with one another. For those incarcerated under Special Administrative Measures, SAM, conditions are even more severe, with constant surveillance of all communications and extreme limitations on visitation and access to outside information. SAM inmates, often considered the most dangerous or influential, face the strictest conditions as their every move is meticulously watched. Among the prison's infamous residents was Jeffrey Dahmer, the Milwaukee cannibal, who was convicted of the brutal murders of 17 young men between 1978 and 1991. Dahmer engaged in acts of necrophilia and cannibalism, horrifying the nation. He was ultimately murdered by a fellow inmate in 1994 while serving his sentence at ADX Florence. Another notable figure housed at ADX Florence was the Unabomber, Ted Kaczynski, who carried out a series of bombings over several years, killing 3 people and injuring many others. Kaczynski's presence at ADX Florence further cemented the prison's reputation for housing individuals whose crimes shocked the world. This high-security facility's reputation for housing the worst criminals is well-earned, making it a place of extreme isolation, fear, and control. With its harsh conditions, limited freedoms, and the constant threat of violence, ADX Florence serves as a grim reminder of the lengths authorities will go to ensure that the most dangerous individuals are kept far from society. La Sante Prison, France. La Sante Prison, located in Paris, France, is infamous for its inhumane conditions and the suffering endured by its inmates. Often described as a place of despair, this prison houses individuals who face severe mental health challenges, with many prisoners resorting to extreme acts of self-harm in their desperation to escape the harsh realities of prison life. Skin diseases are rampant due to the lack of adequate shower facilities, which are only available twice a week. The cells, with temperatures often exceeding 100 degrees Fahrenheit, are breeding grounds for lice, rats, and other pests. Prisoners stuff cracks in their walls with their clothes to try to block the rats, and most of the mattresses are infested with insects. The level of violence and mental anguish within La Sante is staggering. In 1999 alone, there were 124 suicides, giving La Sante one of the highest suicide rates among European prisons. For comparison, California's much larger prison population reported just 24 suicides that same year. The emotional toll on inmates is immense, with many suffering from deep depression and feelings of hopelessness. Inmates are often left without proper psychiatric care, exacerbating their conditions. The prison itself is a grim place with no comfort or relief from the overwhelming despair that defines life within its walls. Among the most infamous prisoners held at La Sante was Jean-Luc Brunel, a French model scout who was implicated in the sex trafficking ring run by the notorious Jeffrey Epstein. Brunel, who founded the modeling agencies Karen Models and MC2 Model Management, was arrested in 2020 after years of accusations of sexual abuse and exploitation. He was known for luring young girls into his networks, where they were trafficked and abused. Despite numerous investigations into his actions, Brunel never faced trial, as he tragically took his own life before he could be held accountable for his crimes. La Sante's appalling conditions, combined with its tragic history of suicides and abuse, make it one of the most harrowing prisons in the world, where the worst criminals suffer from both physical and psychological torment. Dooley State Prison, Georgia. Located in Unadilla, Georgia, Dooley State Prison has gained a reputation for being one of the most troubling and controversial correctional facilities in the state. This medium-security facility, which predominantly houses sex offenders, has become infamous not only for its inmate population, but also for the numerous scandals that have plagued it since its inception. The prison has repeatedly been a focal point for allegations of mistreatment and abuse, reflecting the toxic environment within its walls. One of the most alarming cases came in 1996, when 11 inmates filed a lawsuit against the prison, accusing guards of inflicting sadistic and degrading abuse. Unfortunately, the court dismissed the lawsuit after citing the Prison Litigation Reform Act, which requires prisoners to demonstrate physical injury to pursue federal action for emotional or mental harm. In 2014, another legal battle arose when Mitchell Lavan-Ludi, an inmate serving a life sentence for murder, sued the prison for religious discrimination. Ludi, who practiced Judaism, claimed that the prison's refusal to provide kosher food during Passover caused significant emotional distress. While prison officials argued that kosher food was unavailable in his housing unit, the case exposed another layer of unfair treatment within the facility. Initially seeking $16 million, Ludi ultimately settled for $200 in 2016, highlighting the ongoing issues with prisoner rights at Dooley. As if these issues weren't enough, in 2016, an FBI sting operation exposed corruption on a massive scale at Dooley State Prison. The operation led to the indictment of 46 correctional officers, with 10 of them coming from Dooley. These officers were charged with smuggling contraband, including cell phones, weapons, and drugs, into the prison, further emphasizing the systemic problems that have festered within this facility. With its infamous history of abuse, corruption, and neglect, Dooley State Prison has become a place of fear, especially for those incarcerated for heinous crimes like child murder. It has come to represent a disturbing example of how power, abuse, and corruption can go unchecked in the most dangerous and infamous prisons in the U.S. There are certain prisons that specialize in housing those guilty of specific crimes, and, in the case of several, they are devoted to housing guilty of the most heinous of crimes, infanticide. But this photo comes from one of the most extreme examples of such a prison known. A prison in Brazil that has dabbled in truly peculiar punishments. Now, it probably goes without saying they're not allowed to do this anymore, but this photo was taken during their heyday, when they went unchecked and unregulated as they dished out whatever punishments they felt fit. To this day, there are many who believe they should still be allowed to do this, given the vile brutality of what those incarcerated did. But what do you think? As always, let us know your thoughts in the comments section down below. Attica Correctional Facility, USA. Attica Correctional Facility, located in Attica, New York, is one of the most notorious and historically significant prisons in the United States. Completed in 1931, it was built as a response to a series of riots and unrest at other state prisons during the late 1920s. Its imposing structure, designed with thick 2-foot walls and numerous guard towers, was meant to house the growing number of inmates and create a secure environment. Yet, despite its formidable design, Attica became known for its harsh conditions and brutal treatment of prisoners. Inmates were often confined to small, cramped cells for up to 14 hours a day, with limited access to food, medical care, and recreational activities. The facility housed many individuals from impoverished backgrounds, with a large percentage of the population being Hispanic or African American, while the correctional staff was predominantly white. This created racial tensions, especially given the lack of understanding between inmates and the mostly rural prison staff. The administration's refusal to allow political organizations or religious services for black Muslim inmates only deepened the divide. These growing cultural tensions came to a head in September 1971 when a confrontation between guards and inmates escalated into a full-scale riot. Inmates took control of several cell blocks, seized hostages, and demanded better conditions and political rights. Negotiations between prison authorities and the inmates ultimately failed, and on September 13th, Governor Nelson Rockefeller approved a forceful assault to retake the prison. The violent retaking of the facility resulted in the deaths of 29 inmates and 10 hostages, with many others suffering serious injuries. The brutality of the attack has been widely criticized, and it left a permanent scar on the history of U.S. corrections. Among the notorious figures at Attica was Aaron Key, known as the East Harlem Rapist, a man who terrorized the streets of Manhattan in the 1990s. Key's violent spree included the rape and murder of young girls, and he was known for his calculated and chilling approach to predation. Key's crimes left a lasting impact on the East Harlem community, and his presence in Attica was a grim reminder of the dangerous individuals that the facility housed. As tensions simmered in the prison, the notorious Attica Manifesto was created, a document written by inmates that exposed the inadequate medical care, mistreatment, and overuse of force. Their statement highlighted the dire conditions within the prison, claiming that the prison hospital was woefully underfunded and staffed by untrained personnel. The manifesto became a call for change, although the tragedy of the riot and its aftermath served as a powerful reminder of the need for reform in America's prison system. Attica's legacy is forever tied to the brutal treatment of its inmates, racial divisions, and the catastrophic events of 1971 that continue to resonate today. Black Dolphin Prison, Russia. Black Dolphin Prison, situated near Russia's border with Kazakhstan, is one of the most secure and feared correctional facilities in the world. It houses some of Russia's most violent and notorious criminals, including serial killers, cannibals, and terrorists. The prison's architecture and security measures are designed to keep its inmates isolated and under constant surveillance. Inmates are confined in small cells that are part of a cell-within-a-cell design, where they are physically separated from each other and have little to no interaction with the outside world. The constant surveillance ensures that every movement is watched, and guards conduct frequent rounds to maintain strict discipline. Life inside Black Dolphin is regimented and harsh, with prisoners waking up early in the morning and remaining confined for the majority of the day. The routine is designed to break down any sense of autonomy or independence. Inmates are prohibited from sitting on their beds during the day and are only allowed to eat their meager meals of bread and soup in their cells. There is no chance for social interaction or recreation beyond brief periods of solitary exercise. Every movement is monitored, and even when inmates are allowed outside their cells, they are escorted with their hands bound and blindfolded to prevent them from learning the layout of the facility or planning an escape. Among the most notorious inmates housed at Black Dolphin is Oleg Rylkov, known as the Togliatti Ripper. Rylkov was a serial rapist and killer who terrorized the city of Togliatti in the 1990s. His crimes, which spanned several years, included the sexual assault and murder of numerous young girls. Rylkov's reign of terror escalated when he abducted and killed a 7-year-old boy in 1996, mutilating the body in a brutal fashion. Black Dolphin's reputation for housing the most dangerous criminals is further solidified by the fact that inmates like Rylkov are forced to endure the harshest conditions imaginable. The prison's design and strict regimen ensure that the most dangerous offenders are kept under constant control and psychological torment, paying the price for their heinous crimes. Kingston Penitentiary, Canada. Kingston Penitentiary, Canada's oldest correctional facility, stood as a symbol of a brutal and harsh justice system for over a century. The prison, which first opened its gates in 1835, quickly became a place where the nation's most dangerous criminals were confined, subjected to grueling conditions and severe punishments. Initially housing a mere 62 inmates, the prison's population grew rapidly, and by 1850, Kingston held 410 inmates, including 24 women housed in a separate section. The living conditions inside Kingston were notoriously poor, and reports from the 19th century revealed horrifying details of the abuse that took place within its walls. A report from 1849 led by George Brown, one of Canada's fathers of Confederation, uncovered the extreme punishments prisoners endured. Young Antoine Boche, for example, was sentenced to 47 lashings during his short time in the prison after being convicted at just 8 years old. Elizabeth Breen, only 12, was subjected to 6 floggings for minor offenses, and James Brown's torment lasted much longer. After receiving over 1,200 lashes, he was declared insane by the prison doctor. The regulations were strict, and inmates were prohibited from speaking to one another, making eye contact, or gesturing. Guards enforced these rules under constant supervision, using corporal punishment to ensure obedience. In the modern era, Kingston housed some of the most notorious criminals, including Clifford Olson, a serial killer whose crimes terrorized Canada in the early 1980s. Olson abducted, raped, and murdered at least 11 children and teenagers. His killing spree, which began in November 1980 with the murder of 12-year-old Christine Weller, spanned over a year and saw Olson escalate his brutal behavior. Olson's victims ranged from 9-year-olds to 17-year-olds, and the violence he inflicted on them was unspeakable. He used manipulation to further his twisted desires, even discussing his predatory inclinations with fellow inmates. Kingston Penitentiary, with its history of severe punishment and torture, was the fitting place for such a disturbed criminal, where the worst offenders faced lifelong consequences in an unforgiving environment. Klong Prem Central Prison, Thailand. Klong Prem Central Prison, located in Bangkok, Thailand, is notorious for its overcrowded conditions and harsh treatment of inmates. With a population of 6,267 prisoners, the facility is far beyond capacity, and the conditions inside are nothing short of appalling. Each small cell, measuring just 1.5 by 3 meters, is intended to house only 1 or 2 prisoners, but instead, 5 men are squeezed into these tight spaces. This overcrowding forces inmates to sleep side by side on thin blue mattresses that barely cover the cold, hard floors. For larger individuals, especially foreigners who may not fit comfortably, the cramped living arrangements are physically restricting and mentally taxing, adding a layer of claustrophobia to an already tense atmosphere. Beyond the physical discomfort, the psychological strain is immense. Many of the inmates here are serving long sentences, often for drug-related offenses, as Thailand has one of the toughest anti-drug laws in the world. The country's harsh stance means that even those convicted of minor drug crimes can spend decades behind bars. While the prison imposes long sentences, it also subjects inmates to further mistreatment. Reports frequently highlight the abuse and torture inflicted by the guards, including prolonged solitary confinement, physical punishment, and the use of restraints. Medical care is minimal at best, and basic human rights are routinely violated, leaving inmates in a constant state of suffering. Among the most infamous individuals to be imprisoned at Klong Prem was Ginggeu Lorsong Nern, a woman whose crime shocked the nation. In 1979, Lorsong Nern, along with several accomplices, kidnapped a 6-year-old boy named Srijaryon Sukying, demanding a ransom of 200,000 baht. When the child's parents failed to meet the ransom demand, the kidnappers cruelly killed the boy, stabbing him and burying him alive. Lorsong Nern, who had worked as a housekeeper for the boy's family, was arrested and convicted of the heinous crime. She was executed in 1979 for her role in the boy's tragic death. Her presence in Klong Prem serves as a reminder of the kind of criminals confined within this grim facility, where the worst offenders face not just the consequences of their crimes, but the oppressive reality of life in one of Thailand's most infamous prisons. HMP Watton, Nottingham. HMP Watton, located in Nottinghamshire, UK, holds the distinction of being Europe's largest facility for housing sex offenders. Established in the 1960s, Watton can accommodate up to 841 inmates, with the vast majority convicted for crimes against children. Due to its overwhelming population of child predators, it is often referred to locally as the Paido Palace. The prison's reputation is further solidified by its notorious punitive measures aimed at maintaining control over the population. Watton takes a strict approach to managing inmate behavior, often resulting in long periods of solitary confinement for those deemed to have violated the rules. The conditions within the B Wing are particularly grim, with overcrowded and poorly ventilated cells. The walls of these tiny spaces are often covered in black mold, leading some inmates to cover them with cardboard to prevent further damage. The prison suffers from a severe lack of medication and adequate health care, which exacerbates the difficult living conditions and increases vulnerability to bullying and criminal activities within the prison. Despite a relatively peaceful relationship between staff and prisoners, some inmates feel that the severity of their punishments is disproportionate, given the nature of their crimes. Self-harm is a frequent issue within Watton, with reports indicating a much higher rate of such behavior compared to other facilities. Support for inmates who engage in self-harm is inadequate, which leads to even further distress for those already suffering emotionally. While violence between inmates is lower than at some other prisons, assaults on staff and prisoners do occur, reflecting the ever-present tension and frustration within the prison. Among the inmates housed there is Steve, who expresses deep remorse for the horrific crime he committed against his stepdaughter. He describes his daily experience as one of constant guilt, pain, and shame, acknowledging that he has not only harmed his victim, but also his family and community. Mike, another long-term inmate, shares his change in perspective regarding child sex offenders, admitting that he initially hated them, but later realized that his own crime, though against an adult, was just as heinous. Watton is undoubtedly a grim environment, and for those convicted of such despicable crimes, it is a fitting place of suffering and punishment. What do you think of the idea of special prisons for child abusers? Let us know in the comments below. See you next time.